Hi everyone, Shannon Petrovich with Therapist Talks. Today's topic is domestic violence, narcissistic anger in action. In this video, I'm going to share about the dynamics between an abuser and a victim. Why do people abuse? Why do people stay in abusive relationships? And what can we do? According to the National Coalition on Domestic Violence, on average, nearly 20 people a minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the U.S. That's more than 10 million men and women a year. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been victims of some form of physical violence by an intimate partner within their lifetime. The hotline number, and I'll say it again at the end, for domestic violence is 800-799-7223. Throughout this video, I'm going to use different gender pronouns. I'm going to try to stay generic. As you can see by the stats, abuse happens to men and women. It cuts across all communities. Still more women than men are abused, and still more commonly the abuse is from a male partner. So if I use those pronouns more often, I'm not negating anyone. My first job as a social worker was with a battered women's shelter in Maine. I'll never forget when I was meeting with this woman in the kitchen, and her toddler was standing nearby. He asked for some ice cream, and she said, "No, honey, we're having dinner soon." He hit her, called her an effing B, and stormed off. So you can see that this abuse is often learned very, very early, that he had learned when he didn't get his way, he hit and called names. So why do people abuse? Yes, it's often that they learned it at a very early age, but that doesn't mean that every abuser grew up in abuse. I've known abusers who have wonderful parents and nurturing upbringings. To grossly oversimplify the personality issues of the abuser, I look at it as having 2 components. One is narcissism, and the other is entitled anger. In essence, someone who has the need and thinks they have the right to abuse another person is self-centered in the extreme, and they engage in entitled anger inside their minds continuously. Narcissism is really confusing. It looks like arrogance, but underneath that smooth, charming exterior is a very fragile ego structure, and it's dependent on others propping them up with constant support. When that support of that fragile ego is threatened with abandonment, it's intolerable. The ego simply cannot survive, and they lash out to regain control. Understanding that this feels like a life and death struggle to the narcissist, and that's why everything is so blown out of proportion, is really important. But you have to combine that with the entitlement towards that anger, and that something is a belief system. The only solution to change that belief system is usually incarceration or the threat of incarceration. That extreme insecurity, self-centeredness, and narcissism, coupled with entitled anger, that's the recipe for disaster. So often a conflict comes out of something simple, like their partner talking to or texting someone, or being a few minutes late, or stopping to talk to a friend at the gym. The narcissism says that that threat to their fragile ego is real, and the entitled anger says that they have a right to assert their control. The result is an epic explosion resulting in violence or threats or verbal abuse. The abuser always blames the victim for their upset, and then often the victim starts to look at ways they can avoid the problem next time. The abuser is often apologetic, very charming and loving, and this begins the cycle of abuse, which leads us to the question, why do people stay? The cycle of abuse is the most seductive part of this scene. That honeymoon period after a blow-up is awesome. It leads to the victim more and more believing if they do something differently, then the abuser will not blow up again. This becomes a pattern of placating. Placating is when you do something with a specific goal of calming down your partner. This isn't just doing something nice for your partner. This is an anxious reaction and putting a lot of time and energy into trying to control the out-of-control behavior of your partner. If you spend a lot of time and energy placating in your relationship, this is a big red flag. There's something seriously wrong. There's constant manipulation in an abusive relationship. The abuser blames the victim, makes the victim feel that he or she is less than, makes them feel they're lucky to have the abuser in their lives and they better not leave the relationship, that they'll never be loved by anyone as much as the abuser loves them, and that we belong together, it's us against the world, I'll kill myself if you leave me, blah, blah, blah. Remember, the narcissist's fragile ego makes it impossible for him to let go in a healthy way. It's life and death. The other thing that happens is isolation. An abuser always isolates the victim from those closest to them. It's often very subtle, but if the fights always happen after going out with friends, then the victim learns to suggest they not go out. If fights happen after she is on a girls' night out, she stops going out with the girls. If he's angry at her parents, she'll distance herself from them too. And there's constant manipulation with intensity levels. The abuser uses variations in intensity to control and manipulate. So the intensity starts off small and it increases until it works. The threats and violence often start out at others, at the walls, at things, at pets, and the victim is intimidated into their role of placating. The victim learns to see that it's safer to placate than to fight, and it's safer to placate than to get out. And it's also safer to placate and respond to the lower levels of intensity, so all that fight and flight is extinguished in her. If we go back to my trauma video, if you remember, when you get that shot of adrenaline to your brain, you have three options: fight, flight, or freeze. So the fight is being extinguished because the abuser can intensify beyond whatever she can bring. And the flight is being extinguished because it's truly safer to stay than go. And so the freeze option comes up. This freeze shows up in higher depression and suicide rates amongst people in abusive relationships. It also results in this cognitive freezing. It makes it hard to make good decisions. It's frustrating for people who love a person in an abusive relationship because you feel like you can't get through to them. But recognize they're in survival mode. You'll often see a person gradually thaw out when they come out of an abusive situation. It's a lot like being held hostage. So what can we do? If you're seeing red flags in your own relationship, take a step back and take stock. If you see entitled anger, watch the video, The Truth About Anger No One Wants to Hear. Does your partner blow up over small things? Do they blame others or you for their anger? Do they have to have control? Are they beginning to isolate you from others you care about? Are you noticing you're falling into the role of placating? Do they say things like, well, I'm sorry I blew up, but you're so important to me and I can't live without you and you mean everything to me and I can't stand it when you, blah, blah, blah. Are your friends and family trying to tell you something and you're not wanting to listen? Stop and listen. Are you afraid that if you break it off, he or she will suicide or come after you? If any of those things are happening, get out. The sooner the better. The situation will not get better the more you placate. In fact, it gets worse. The longer you stay connected to someone like that, the harder it is for you to get out because you go into a cognitive freeze, and the harder it is for that person to let go because they're becoming more and more obsessed with you. But I love him or her. Well, abuse isn't love. If you don't feel safe, if you don't feel supported, encouraged, and trusted by and able to trust in your partner, that's not love. It might be lust or attachment or obsession, but it isn't love. And you can love a person for their good qualities and still see the whole relationship for what it is. And you can decide to leave them even if you still feel that emotional attachment. You can decide to leave for your own emotional and physical health and for the health of your children if you have any. If you know someone in an abusive situation, recognize they're being manipulated, traumatized, and they've employed survival mechanisms that have now got them in a frozen mode. Thawing out often involves seeing the truth gradually. You can help them gently see the truth, unless they're in grave danger, and then you may need to be more forceful in showing them what you see and giving them whatever support they need to get out. So support them, listen, validate, don't judge. Keep loving and listening. Even if they stay, don't give up. How can one get out? There is support everywhere. Domestic violence programs and shelters are in every city. The national hotline number again is 800-799-7223. You can always call 911 and keep calling. You can get a protection from abuse order. Whatever it takes, do it. You're worth it. If you appreciated this video, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment or suggestion for other video topics, and follow us on Facebook at Therapist Talks. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.